Bob Murphy Show, episode 364.
There's a tidal wave coming. What you gonna do?
Get ready for another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. It's your source for commentary and interviews, conducted by a Christian and economist. Now here's your host, Bob Murphy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Bob Murphy Show. We've got yet another crossover with Adam Heyman. This time we're talking about Trump's recent tweet where he threatened the BRICS countries that if they continued with this foolish plan of coming up with an alternative to the mighty U.S. dollar, that he would have to impose 100% tariffs on them. So we talk about that and related issues. Hope you like it.
Hello there, Bob.
Hey, Adam.
So I wanted to talk to you because I heard something in the news that I didn't understand, and I figure you would. Why does Trump seem to be so angry recently with the world's most resilient and affordable housing material, the brick?
I think there's something about Big Wolf and some corruption behind the scenes, I believe.
Big Wolf. All right. Well, we are, of course, talking about incoming President Donald J. Trump, who sent a provocative truth, which then became a provocative tweet. Shall I just read it for the fine folks?
I think so.
All right. He says, this is the future president, mind you.
The once and future president.
That's right. Oh, my Lord. He's Arthurian. Did a watery tart lob a scimitar at him? Okay, here's Donald Trump. The idea that the BRICS countries are trying to move away from the dollar while we stand by and watch is over, all caps, over. We require a commitment from these countries that they will neither create a new BRICS currency nor back any other currency to replace the mighty U.S. dollar, or they will face 100% tariffs and should expect to say goodbye to selling into the wonderful U.S. economy. They can go find another sucker. Seems a little inflammatory.
Yeah. Now, is that where yours ended? Because in my version, he's got one more sentence.
Oh, no, I might have copy-paste errored, so yeah, let it fly.
It goes on to say, there is no chance that the BRICS will replace the U.S. dollar in international trade, and any country that tries should wave goodbye to America.
Oh, wow. No, I missed that. Any capitalized words? Because that's how you
dollar had a capital D. BRICS, of course, was all capital. International trade, just the I and the T were capitalized. But then he said, and any country that tries, and the C of country was also capitalized.
That's how you know he means it.
Yeah.
Deciphering the Donald. Yeah, so what do you think? Why did he say that? What do you think he's trying to do? What effects, ill or good, does this portend? What do you think, Bob?
Okay, so the context here is there has been talk, I think for years at this point, that, hey, the BRICS countries do not like the fact of the strength of the U.S. dollar, and by various metrics, the BRICS are certainly larger than the United States on a purchasing power parity measure, and maybe I'll take a moment to explain what that is. China alone surpassed the U.S. a while ago, I want to say like in 2014 or something. That might be off, but it's been a while. And by the way, so for what that means, in case people hear that thrown around a lot and they don't know the exact distinction, if you want to say like what is the U.S. economy bigger than China? Of course, the official measures, the U.S. GDP is measured in U.S. dollars, and the Chinese GDP is measured in the yuan. And so then you need to know, well, how do you compare dollars with yuan? And so one way is you can look at the official exchange rate in terms of the international currency markets, and then by that measure, the U.S. economy is still bigger than China's. But a different way of assessing that is to say, all right, well, in terms of a basket of consumer goods, like how many, if you want to say like a haircut and a pound of apples and this, that, and you throw a gallon of gasoline, you just throw in some stuff that a household might want, and then say, how many dollars does the typical American household need to buy that basket? And then do the same experiment in China. And then you use that as to say, that's what's called purchasing power parity, to say that's the sense in which we're putting dollars and yuan on a common footing. By that approach, China's GDP has been higher than the US's for a while now. Okay, so either way, the BRICS collectively are bigger than the US, of course. And so people for a while have been saying, well, why don't they just develop their own currency? Because right now the US is still the dominant global reserve currency. And so I think that's the context. And they've been having summits and so on. And there was something, within the last 3 months or so where they had a big thing. And there's always logistical problems. And so this is a divide even like among Austro-libertarian types. This is like a running dispute. In fact, when I was on the zero hedge debate in February of 24, it was Jim Rickards and I were against Brent Johnson, the dollar milkshake guy, and Michael Every on this question about, what's the pace of global dollar or de-dollarization, I should say. Okay, so this is a running thing about, how fast is this going to happen? And so I think, Adam, Trump is coming in on this issue amidst all this talk, and it's a very Trumpian thing to say is, no, our best days are ahead of us, and it's the king dollar, and we're not just going to sit here and watch as these foreigners plot to get out from under our thumb. That no, we're on top, and we're going to just, if we catch any backsliding, we're going to show those people who's boss. So I think that's the context for this.
Yeah, real quick question. Excuse me, I don't want to derail you, but as you were talking about purchasing power parity.
Mm-hmm.
When economists are looking at that and comparing it, do they try and disentangle weird things like government subsidies or, I don't know, slave labor or any other weird distortions, or do they just take what it costs in the store, and forget all the rest?
All right, so the honest answer is I don't know. That I've never looked deeper into how do they actually compute that stuff. I'm just telling you what the concepts mean. But that's one reason. So let me answer it this way. So for, let's say, chauvinistic Americans who are like, no, we're number one, and those Chinese communists can't hold a candle to us and whatever. And if I say, oh, by the purchasing power parity metric, China, years ago surpassed the U.S. in terms of total output. And if they want to say, oh, I don't believe in that academic, pointy head stuff, get out of here, that's fine. But what's ironic is it's a typical MAGA person who also thinks, oh, yeah, those dirty Chinese, they're manipulating their currency in order to boost their exports to the U.S. And so what that means is they're keeping their currency artificially weak against the dollar. And so, yes, the Chinese government could be using, for example, they could just be taxing their own people and then taking the tax revenue, measured in yuan, and then going into the foreign exchange markets and using them to buy dollars to then go buy treasuries. Mm-hmm. Okay, so by doing that, that would weaken their currency vis-a-vis the dollar, and then that would allow them to export more stuff to the U.S. So I think, that's what people had in mind back when they said, oh yeah, China's engaging in currency manipulation. That was kind of a thing, like 10 years ago or something. That was a popular thing people were saying. Actually more like 15 years ago, right? So that's what they mean. So what I'm saying is that's why I don't think looking just at the official US dollar yuan exchange rate is necessarily meaningful. Just that's one example of the kind of thing you might have in mind, Adam, is that, yeah, if a government is deliberately undervaluing their currency, perhaps in a misguided mercantilist effort to boost their exports, then that might also artificially reduce their official GDP relative to the U.S. So I don't know in terms of the old Soviet Union, if you were trying to compare their GDP. So it's true, the more command and control an economy is, the less meaningful their, quote, official prices are. But for China, I'm assuming, they can reasonably go get some data on looking at a major city or something and saying, how much does a bowl of ramen cost or whatever, not to be stereotypical.
Gotcha. And the reason we're focusing on China It's because there are a bunch of countries in this new BRICS alliance. Last I looked, there was 9 of them, but China is like well over 50% as far as the size of their economy compared to the whole thing. The other countries are Brazil, Russia, Iran, India, South Africa, Egypt, Ethiopia, and United Arab Emirates.
Right. So a lot of those are silent in the BRICS.
Yeah, there would have to be. It was funny when I saw
Unless it's like LGBTQ, it's BRICS,
an ellipses and then an
Yeah.
infinity sign. Yeah. It was funny to see Ethiopia in there. It reminded me of the group of nations that George W. Bush assembled, the coalition of the willing, and you'd see like Tonga or it's a country. You got to include it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why I guess China is the most impactful actor, but Russia's part of it too. And I find that one really interesting because listening to some of the things Putin has said, it seems like the only reason he's really interested is just because of the sanctions and whatnot that the West has foisted upon him since the Ukraine thing kicked off. And he wants to, he wants other options, obviously, but it makes me wonder, like, if we had a healthy relationship, whether Russia would even want to be involved in this thing. It seems a little weird.
Well, yeah, and that's partly my, I guess, my main reaction to Trump's position here is that, as you say, Adam, the part of the rationale for this, it's not simply a matter of the fundamentals, but it's strategic. That obviously Russia and China and other countries that feel that they might be not in the good, Iran, not in the good graces of the United States, that they're looking at what happened to Russia in the wake of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and the U.S. has been doing things, whether you think it's a good idea or not. They have been doing things that surprised people in the international community, right? Like freezing the bank accounts of Russian oligarchs or whatever, you know what I mean? So it's not merely targeting the Russian government or something, or not merely blocking arms sales to Putin, but punishing any company that is doing business with somebody in Russia. That has now become very difficult to pull off, if not outright illegal. Okay. And then they were making exemptions with, maybe our friends in Europe can still buy gas and stuff from Russia because we realize that, the winter might be tough. There were things like that. But the point was, it wasn't merely Western weapons that were being used in the confrontation with Russia, but the fact that the dollar is the world's reserve currency allowed them to turn off the SWIFT system in terms of clearing with banks, international banks and so forth. That just really you can lock out companies from international trade pretty easily, given the right now the role of the U.S. dollar, and so that gives the U.S. government an outsized influence to really isolate people. And so I think the finance ministers and whatever in other countries that are more neutral, they said, yeah, right now we're fine with the U.S., but this is not. We don't like being in this position. Like, what happens if there's a different administration 10 years from now and they all of a sudden don't like us? They can just flip a switch and lock us out of the international trade. And that's not a nice position to be in.
I can't believe what I'm hearing right now. Are you telling me that there's actors in governments around the world that look at the U.S. as a authoritarian, capricious, arbitrary, vindictive entity that they can't trust to continue? It does bring up an obvious question.
It reminds me of The Simpsons when Homer says, "If I think we can trust the president of Cuba." Yeah.
It makes me wonder, given how obvious what an incredible boon it is for us as Americans that the dollar is used as the world's reserve currency, when government actors here decide to use these methods to try and, use the stick and control other countries, do they even think about what they're risking? If other countries try to shift away and use something else, or do they just always think that we have the ultimate power, and if anybody ever really does try and use something else, we'll just go Gaddafi them to death, and our power is supreme, there's really nothing they can do? Is that their mindset, do you think?
I think so, and that's the irony here, just to spell it out in case some of the listeners aren't getting it, that given that the the reason a lot of these countries are trying to wean themselves from reliance on the dollar is that they don't trust, they don't like the fact that Washington has this huge stick. You don't solve that problem by saying, hey, if you try to leave us, we're going to beat you, which is basically, the tactic they're using. And so, yeah, that might work in the short run, but clearly that just reinforces the fact that, yeah, we need to get out of this abusive relationship. And so, but you're right, to your point, Adam, like I saw on Twitter, again, so Brent Johnson, who's the dollar milkshake guy, that's one of his frequent, I say talking points. I don't mean to like say he's not a deep thinker or something, but that's just something that comes up often when he has these conversations, is he'll say there are a lot of things, and he's clear. He's saying, I'm not endorsing this. I don't think it's a good thing. I'm just trying to be realistic here, advise my clients as to what they think the world's going to look like over the next 10 years, saying there's a lot of things at the U.S.'s disposal, and they're not just going to sit back and let the dollar's position evaporate, that they're going to do things, and perhaps in some cases invading countries and whatnot, is, the claims about maybe that's why they, went against Gaddafi, whatever. It wasn't because they all of a sudden discovered that he wasn't a Boy Scout, that there were other reasons. So I think that's fine. And so when Trump tweeted this out, there were a lot of people, Adam, who were sort of saying like, point Brent Johnson kind of thing. Whereas this tweet, to me, it kind of does both things. You know what I mean? That, in other words, the people saying, no, folks, the dollar's days are numbered. What the U.S. government has done in this war with Ukraine, or this proxy war with Russia, that's the die is cast now. That, yes, it takes time. They can't just all switch and start using something else next Tuesday. But the people, the leaders around the world now realize we cannot allow this to persist, and we have to start building parallel systems. And so for me, Trump's tweet showed, if anything, don't think that because I'm less bellicose in terms of outright military confrontation, that you don't need to put the pedal to the metal in terms of this de-dollarization. That no, if anything, that's showing, yeah, this guy's crazy. We better hurry and wean ourselves from it. It would be like let me use this as an example. Tell me, Adam, if this works or not. So, there's Bitcoin maxis, right? People who really want everyone to just use Bitcoin. And so then imagine, there was some merchant who has been accepting Bitcoin for years. He got on the bandwagon years ago. Anything he sells, he'll take Bitcoin in exchange for it, right? But then you hear, but he's also starting to take Ethereum and Bitcoin Cash. And so you say to him, if we catch wind that you start accepting those other ones, then we're going to put 100% increase on anything we sell to you quoted in Bitcoin. And that might be a short-term solution to get him to back off that, depending on, the volume of his sales or whatever. But you can see how, in the long run, that's not going to work. That's going to have the opposite effect, right? That's not going to keep everyone just accepting Bitcoin. That's going to show them, whoa, I better diversify, because the people again, assuming that someone had the power to do that. Obviously with Bitcoin, you can't do that, but you get the point, that if you're trying to get people to accept your currency, because that's really what's happening here, right? The people are selling us stuff for dollars, and then Trump is mad about that. And so, or that they might stop doing that. And so he's saying, you better, not accept anything else, or else we're not going to allow you to sell your stuff to us for dollars anymore, which is also weird too, because it's kind of the flip side. He's also mad at all these countries selling us too much stuff for dollars. And hey, how come you keep selling us so much of your stuff for dollars? You know what I mean? Like it's like he can't decide what he's mad about.
Yeah, it's definitely the kind of short-term, circular, garbled thinking you'd expect from a politician. Do you have any visibility on what the currency is that these BRICS countries would like to switch to? I just briefly read an article that said that they were going to have trouble because their economies are so different. It'd be difficult to integrate them. But I mean, are they thinking like a basket of goods sort of concept, or do you know what they're aiming at?
I think they've been batting around different proposals, and it is. I agree with the critics who say it's going to be hard for them to get it up and running because they don't have, deep capital markets to the extent that the U.S. and, New York and London and so forth. Like there's reasons the U.S. right now and the West more generally kind of run global commerce. and are provide the foundation for it. So the reason that's the case, and it is harder to come and supplant that. And I don't think it's so you're right, Adam. Partly it's because they don't, these are not Rothbardians, right? And so you're right. They're thinking of it in terms of barter almost. And well, gee, what do we need the West for? Because we have enough, food that we grow internally, and we have enough natural resources, and we can. And I think that's just goofy that you don't need to be a self-sufficient economy, right? All they're really changing over is almost like the internal accounting in terms of that, just how they price things and so forth. So if you get what I'm saying, like there's plenty of countries right now just dealing with themselves, right? Like if China sells something to Russia, who then, buys or then sells something in turn to South Africa or whatever, like that's a lot of those transactions, at least before the war, would be priced in US dollars. Mm-hmm. Certainly if, if it involved oil. And so even though it wasn't that it was going into and out of the United States. So I'm just saying that it really isn't essential that these economies need to all be interrelated and so on, except for if there's like sanctions involved. Obviously, at some point, you can say, no, we want to make it so that you can draw an imaginary line around us and we could all be self-sufficient internally vis-a-vis the rest of the world. So that's an element too, but that's almost like a separate decision from, the currency, the accounting.
Yeah.
You could even price stuff in terms of international dollars if you just had a way to keep the flows internally. You know what I mean? Like if you just used literally $100 bills, you could just pass those around. The U.S. can't like press a button and make the U.S. bills go up in smoke. You know what I mean? So you can do whatever you want. You can have the bills just sitting in vaults in Moscow and China and so forth, and they could just trade claims against that electronically internally. So it's a big part of the problem, Adam, what I'm getting is these people, they're central planners, right? So they don't know how to think about this stuff. And that's one thing that I was saying in that zero hedge debate was there's plenty of private sector alternatives to government issued fiat money that are being developed. Like you can have blockchain solutions, you can have gold that's stored somewhere and just, digitally transfer the claims on that. You could have a basket of goods, there's all sorts of things they could do. So I think they're having trouble coming up with a substitute for all the reasons that like the Bretton Woods Agreement, the reason they could hammer that out was because the U.S. was so dominant, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas these countries, there's more rivalry involved. They each have different strengths. Obviously China's the big boy in town, but I think that's part of it, that they want to still maintain the government control of the printing press. Whereas, if they were willing to just go to a full-blown decentralized market-based solution, I think they could pretty easily, just allow their people the freedom to use that stuff. And I think they would naturally gravitate towards something that, probably would involve gold and or Bitcoin.
Well, given who we're talking about, I'm going to bet against that being the thing.
Right.
I want to ask you a bunch of questions about what you think Trump's thinking, what prompted this, where do you think this will go, both economically and militarily. But to put a little spice on it, I thought I'd read a little more from this article I just read. It talks about some of Trump's defenders defending what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
So this article says the Mexican president, Claudia Sheinbaum, threatened a tariff war in response, but some Trump allies have suggested his recent announcements have been negotiation tactics, meant as more of an opening bid than a promise. Asked about the president-elect's proposed use of tariffs, Republican Senator Ted Cruz responded by noting, quote, the importance of leverage, unquote. And then again, quoting, you look at the threat of tariffs against Mexico and Canada immediately has produced action, the Texan said on CBS News' Face the Nation on Sunday. On Friday, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made an unscheduled trip to Trump's Florida estate, Mar-a-Lago. Got to kiss the ring of the new. Mm-hmm. Seemingly to head off a potential 25% tariff on Canadian goods heading south. Trump's pick for Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, has previously suggested that the president-elect's threats to impose major tariff hikes were part of his negotiating strategy. Quote, "My general view is that at the end of the day, he is a free trader," Bessent said of Trump in an interview with Financial Times before he was nominated for the role. Quote, "It's escalate to de-escalate," unquote. So with that in mind, what do you think prompted the truth or the tweet or whatever? And what do you think's going through his head? How do you think it's going to be? Is he the master negotiator? I mean, these are all garble-headed central planning doofuses. Can he be a more alpha doofus and crack the whip and get him back into shape, or what?
Okay, so I think at least some of that is just his more broad-based approach that, hey, we're going to have high tariffs, when I come in there, and then, with select partners, we'll maybe ratchet them down if they reciprocate and so on. So I think that's separate from, hey, if we catch wind of any of these BRICS countries trying to develop their alternate currency, then we're going to slap on 100% tariffs, right? That, in other words, I don't think he's accusing Canada of trying to set up an alternate, currency. And then you're right. I've seen guys like Steve Moore, for example, that are, old school free market guys, free traders who are now, on Team Trump. And so that's one way I've seen two major defenses of this that in my mind are at least plausible. So one is to say, oh, he wants to just replace income taxes. And so, you can argue if it's dollar for dollar, that's plausible, especially if they cut government spending a lot such that tariffs could completely replace the IRS. I would actually be in favor of that. I don't think that would happen. And so I'd be worried about letting the genie out of the bottle, but strictly speaking on paper, if you could do that, yeah, that'd be awesome. And then the other one is what you're saying, the strategic thing where Trump is just threatening tariffs with the goal being to get them to reduce their tariff barriers so that we're not the suckers sitting here just trading with everybody. Because, we all get, Bob, that the case for free trade is a unilateral one, that if tariffs are stupid, just because other countries are putting tariffs against us, it only hurts us even more to put tariffs, on their stuff. But you got to look at the game theory involved. And I think I might have used this before on this podcast, Adam, but to me, that's like saying, if you go into a bank and you hand a note over to the teller that says, "I'm strapped with dynamite," you might walk out of the bank with more money. But that doesn't mean blowing yourself up is the way to riches, right? It's a very dangerous game. And then if you do have to, have your bluff called, then you're hurting yourself, right? So if people want to say 9 times out of 10 when Trump threatens some given country with these huge tariff hikes, they're going to back down. And so in the long run, we think overall it's worth it. Okay, but guys like Charlie Kirk and even Vivek Ramaswamy, unfortunately, when they're out, on the campaign trail talking to people about tariffs, they're not merely saying, oh, yes, we realize this is a tax and it's bad and distortionary, but it's a regrettable evil. That's not what they're saying. No, they're saying all these benefits to national security and, domestic manufacturing jobs and blah, blah, blah. And, the world, life is more important than GDP, you consumers. They're saying all kinds of, and like Orrin Cass is another one, that they're talking all about the virtues. And hey, look at how rich the U.S. was back when we had all kinds of tariffs. And even Pat Buchanan, I hate to say, back when he was, running for president, whatever, so they weren't merely saying that, oh yeah, it's strategic and we know that putting tariffs on ourselves is stupid, but sometimes if you threaten to do something crazy, you get the other guy to back down. That's not merely what they're saying.
Do you have any insight on how this has been perceived by the countries in question?
I think so. That's something that Vivek was saying, and like along the lines of what I just said. So I recently did an episode where I walked through it was Vivek and Charlie Kirk were at some university in Georgia. I don't know exactly which one it was, and they were like having the students come up to a microphone, and it was very, impressive that those guys are good on their feet. And one of the students was a self-described Austrian and asked about free trade. And, I don't like Trump's tariffs and whatever. And Vivek said basically what I just said about their strategic element that, Trump understands free trade and the case for it. And it's just, it's not that we're starting out at a state of genuine free trade among all the countries of the world. and Trump is this outlier who now wants to impose tariffs. No, he's inheriting a situation where we're the sucker and we have all these unfair deals in place, and Trump is just trying to use threats in order to leverage and get a better position. And then he ended with saying, and that's if you go look at how Trump behaved in his first term, that's exactly what he did. So I think Vivek, could point to some real thing. Off the top of my head, Adam, I don't remember the specifics, but I do know at the time that I think there were something like with Canada, I want to say like with lumber or something, where Trump threatened something and maybe even had it in effect for a little bit, and then the rates got reduced on both sides or something like that. So I think they're not completely just making stuff up, that they can point to some real world successes. But on the other hand, again, I don't even know if that's what they're promising right now. And with some of this stuff too, like you don't have like a 10-page policy document spelling out exactly what they're going to do. A lot of this is just coming from reading Trump's tweets or whatever. But so yeah, I think they're not completely making it up, and that some countries actually have been willing to negotiate on that stuff. Because from their point of view, the foreign governments, if they have exporters who are selling a lot into the U.S., and then Trump says, oh, we're going to jack up rates on those people, that's a very concentrated harm to a politically powerful constituency that then go to that government and say, hey, just cut a deal with this guy. This is crazy. So it's not a crazy idea. But again, just like saying, hey, it might work if you go into the bank and, if they see you really have dynamite and you really are going to blow it up, they don't want to lose 5 employees.
Yeah, could work. Maybe once, maybe twice. I'm an anarcho-capitalist. I don't believe in nation states. I don't like monopoly provision of government. So it frustrates me that we have to analyze these things from inside the prison of one of these things. And I have to admit that given the fact that my rulers are so bellicose, trying to start at least 3 different wars on different corners of the planet, it makes me nervous that all our semiconductors that you need for a high scale war are produced somewhere else. That gives me pause. And I hate sort of being tempted to think a tariff is a good idea for horrible reasons, which leads me to an even deeper and weirder question. If we're trying to do, we being the government, trying to do these things to save the world reserve status of the U.S. dollar, well, from our perspective, the U.S. dollar, like all these other fiat currencies, is trash. Should we be really trying to have it saved, or should I be hoping that it blows up just like all other fiat currencies and maybe something more stable comes out of the dust? It's just hard to know how to think about these sorts of things. Short-term, long-term, intermediate, the greater good, all these things.
Yeah, so I think on that narrow question, in general, I am more of the mindset that it's better if government officials don't deliberately make things awful. Okay, that in other words, that given that they're going to do something, I think it's better if in general they do things that are closer to common sense and that more like analogous to what would happen if a private sector voluntary institution existed. And partly that it's just because people are so crazy and so willing to accept outrages that I think people underestimate just, let me just back up 1 second, because there is a school of thought, and Walter Block writes on this stuff. Like for example, Walter Block has written that he doesn't think public libraries should kick out, like if some homeless guy moves in and just camps out on the table and he's just he's very, it makes you turn your nose and whatever, and makes it so that just people can't use the library. Walter thinks that it's not just that it's a libertarian right, and who are we to tell him to move, but also he thinks that's good because then the public will realize the futility of public libraries and they'll just shut it down.
It shows the absurdity of the principle on its face.
Right. And I disagree with that strategically.
I do too.
Because I think it assumes, oh yeah, most people are like Walter Block, and all they need to do is just see something and have it explained to them, and then they'll see the light and become anarcho-capitalist. And I don't think that's the case. I mean, just look at how horrible like the Gulag system was and how awful the Soviet Union was, and it lasted for several years. So yeah, eventually it reached an end point, and the absurdity and the contradictions mounted, and they overthrew that system. But it took a long time, and millions of people died. So I don't like the idea of, oh, let's just let everything go to hell, because then there'll be a crisis, we'll hit rock bottom, and then out of the ashes, we'll have a better society. I think that, I don't want my kids going through that. I'll put it that way.
Oh, I totally agree. I'm not a collapsitarian for exactly those reasons. But what the government is doing is so big and complicated, I can't predict which is the most sensible route.
Mm-hmm.
Like if they peel back their semiconductor operations through the use of tariffs and get themselves satisfied that they've got the lithium and the steel and everything that they need, is that going to make them even more warlike?
Well, but right. So that's what I was going to say. So I do, in a moment, folks, yes, I will go down the, in a purely free market, what would we do about semiconductor, monopolies? But yes, in terms of the real world right now, to say, hey, I don't like the fact that the U.S. is vulnerable, and what if we went to war with China where we have the semiconductor shortage? So let's have tariffs put in place against China so the U.S. can develop its domestic capability. Right, Adam, I agree with you that it's not obvious to me that we should want the U.S. government to feel like, okay, now at this point, yeah, we could go ahead and have a 2-year war with China. We could do it. I like them thinking, no, we couldn't do it right now because they have all the semiconductors. That war out explicit hot war with China is not an option. I kind of like the U.S. government thinking that. But besides that, though, just in general, if we had a night watchman state country, and what if it just so happened the logistics were that it made more sense, it was more efficient for them to import all of their semiconductors from some neighboring state, and wouldn't that be silly? And wouldn't that show the futility of free trade? Just real quickly, just for completeness, if that were the case, then for one thing, speculators in that region could stockpile semiconductors, right? Because they could look ahead and say, if there's a 1% chance that we go to war with this country next year, they're going to blockade us, and the price of semiconductors is going to go through the roof, so we can stockpile them now, right? It's not like they're eggs and they're going to expire, right? You can do that, and then more generally, you can play with the numbers, but like a ski resort can be shut down during the summer months and then be run in the winter months. All right. So in the real world, this isn't science fiction. In the real world market economy, there are operations that are, put on mothballs for some period of time because when it's running, it's profitable enough that it justifies the whole thing, existing. And so likewise, if it's like, yeah, once every 10 years, we might go to war, in which case we need this domestic semiconductor factory cranking out stuff, well, the market could go ahead and do that. What doesn't make sense is say, oh, let's let some central planners in our capital decide when we need semiconductors. We're going to use tariff policy. That's not going to work. They can't anticipate this. They don't have the relevant information.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I just want to double down on how weird this world is, where I don't know what's good news or bad news or what's good government policy. Similarly, like when I found out that Russia and China too, I think, have these hypersonic missiles that we can't stop. I think Russia just dropped one on Kiev. I'm like, well, that's horrifying. It couldn't be worse news, right? Except maybe the existence of that technology will slow down my own ridiculously aggressive and warmongering government, give them pause to not push as hard as they've been pushing for the last, I don't know, several decades at the very least. It's confounding. I don't know. There's no question in there. It's just confounding.
Yeah. A lot of this stuff. I mean, I don't know enough of the history and the military capabilities to speculate on it, but I have heard a case to be made against like the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, right? So a case against that to say it's not good for the U.S. government and its close allies to just police the world and use money and threats to keep other governments from developing nuclear weapons. that, it's kind of like gun control on a global scale. And just like you could say, it's to say, oh no, it's very naive for the progressive leftists to say domestically, no, don't worry, have the government disarm everybody. And then if you ever get in trouble, you just call the police and they'll come and take care of it. And, this way you're not going to get assaulted by a private criminal. That likewise to just say, oh no, we're going to have all the responsible governments have a monopoly on nuclear weapons and they'll keep, all the other governments from getting them. And then if some country gets invaded, they'll just call on NATO or whoever and say, hey, come help me. And that's how we ensure, right, that it's the same kind of logic.
Yeah, we can definitely see how bad the status quo is with that treaty and that principle. But on the other hand, if every person, country, HOA on the planet had nukes, that would worry me tremendously. And the gun control argument isn't a perfect analogy because a gun can be used as a perfect defensive weapon. Aim at one guy, the bad guy, and pull the trigger and he goes down. Whereas a nuke, by description and definition, cannot be used without killing innocent people.
Well, you need atomic bullets.
There you go. Real tiny nuclear arms. I have a weird question, but I don't want to drop it on you until you've had your say about what you think is gonna happen with the Trump's crazy threats and what do you think BRICS is going to do? Do you think there'll be more coalitions that'll either try and join BRICS or start a third thing, or what do you think is likely to happen?
I think it may be true that in the short run, he does get some concessions, but I think just him tweeting like that's just going to confirm for people that, we, in the long run, we need to make plans. We cannot be dependent on the US dollar. This is just too much power to have in the hands of one government. So I think that's just going to accelerate. Also with this stuff too, even if it weren't for that, I just think the natural forces of the development of different rails in the financial sector for moving payments around, this kind of stuff that my day job with Infinio, stuff we're doing, it's for people who are not right in the space. I think they don't realize how fast this is happening, but just using blockchains of various types just to move different assets around. I think 20 years from now, it's just everything's going to be so splintered and it's just going to be so easy, even for just a wealthy individual, let alone a government, to just move around and switch between different currencies and different asset types and whatever and say, oh, I want to send the equivalent of, 60 tons of gold over to this person and And I just think that's going to be so easy to do that the idea of the US dollar being this dominant reserve currency is going to be obsolete at some point, regardless of what happens. But I think this kind of stuff is just going to accelerate or, pull forward the date at which that otherwise would have happened more naturally.
Yeah, I consider that good news. If you're saying tech is going to evolve our way out of that particular mess, I would call that good news.
Yeah, I think so. That it's just going to give more options to people. It's just going to be a lot easier to negotiate transactions in whatever currency you want. And you're not going to have this lock-in effect that you do right now so much.
Yeah, it is weird that government officials behave so, again, capriciously, arbitrarily, dangerously, unreliably, such that they cause these military and economic alliances to form against them. Like if Washington had just been the city on the hill and awesome in our private property and free markets and all of that, I don't think any of these things would have formed. They would have had less reason to form. And then once they do, you see all these horrible unintended consequences that have been happening forever. We were horrified when China started investing in Africa like they did and getting into relationships with Brazil and I think other countries in South America. Did you hear? I just read this. I don't know if it's true. But you remember when Brazil was feuding with Elon Musk over Twitter and trying to get him to censor certain things, and he was refusing because he's a free speech guy. And then they took it out on his Starlink business. And then I just read that some Chinese company just signed a contract with Brazil to provide them that same service, internet via low Earth orbit satellite. And it made me wonder, is the CCP or whoever sort of bribing or twisting the arm of the Brazilian government to get them to do that to Elon, to get, you know, it's just this weird combination of political and commercial interests.
Yeah, I don't know on that specific one, but I think you're right to be thinking along those lines. And yeah, I think behind the scenes, there's like 200 to 300 people right now that are largely determining the fate of the globe over the next 5 years.
Yeah.
And that, within, they're not omniscient and omnipotent, but I'm just saying that the course of events, I think it's controlled by a relatively small group of people. But fortunately, they're not all aligned. Like they're all, it's like the different mafia families. They all want to control New York or something, and they make deals with each other, but they are in conflict with each other. But yeah, I mean, Elon Musk, he's personally worth more than most nation states in terms of the disposable assets of the various governments involved, and given the technologies he's developing, I think we've talked about this before, Adam, that I think partly Elon Musk is working on stuff, and they're investing in next levels of AI and so forth, and with all the developing rockets and whatnot. I think if I were Elon Musk, I would say I just need to remain alive and out of prison for 10 years. And then I'm going to be in a spot where I'm untouchable. I'm going to literally have a private robot army that can defend me physically, and I'll have killer satellites in space that can, if some minor, some mid-level government wants to go against my empire, I could seriously knock out their satellites and make it so that their missiles can't even hit my stuff.
You know what I mean? 3 more administrations and I'll be set.
So I really do think, so for him, when Trump, I think that's partly why he went so all in on Trump. He just got 4 years right there where he knows, okay, I'm okay. And, I can just solidify my defenses and whatever. So anyway,
clearly if Trump had lost, the other side of this, the left side of this regime, I think they were going to penalize Elon, I think severely.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, he might have ended up in prison. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in Russia, they famously, certain billionaires cross Putin or whatever, they end up in prison for bogus charges. Yeah. So that's not a weird thing. And we saw that, like you said, with Brazil and whatever. I mean, there were people openly talking about how Elon needed to be arrested, that he needs to be stopped. So you could say, oh, it didn't happen and that was all childish talk, but it's partly because it fell out of the news cycle because Trump won. Yeah. And it's not an issue. So yeah, I definitely, and I'm not saying it's like, oh yeah, Trump's the hero of humanity and the other guys are monsters. I'm just saying though, that in terms of the different factions involved and the coalitions they formed, that yes, clearly the whole, blockchain community, they did not have friends in the various positions like at the SEC and whatever under the Biden administration. And then, the Trump team coming in, they're not all Rothbardians, but there's a lot of people that are very friendly to entrepreneurship. And we just got to have regulatory certainty and let people build. And we want to have, the U.S. be the Bitcoin capital of the world. And, people talking like that. So it's not, again, laissez-faire anarcho-capitalism, but it's certainly, I would say, many respects better than what would have happened. And certainly if you are Elon Musk yourself, which one did you want to win? And what your personal future, what's the trajectory of your success is much better with Trump winning.
I think horrible forces are arrayed against us. And, we face calamity on multiple fronts, but I do think it was a huge white pill to see Elon make the move he did in such dramatic fashion. And then to see a whole bunch of those people you're talking about, really rich, really influential and smart and powerful tech entrepreneurs following suit. That was a big deal when they turned against Biden and then Harris and supported Trump.
Yeah, and I don't know, because you even saw too, like with the MMA fighter, doing the Trump dance and all that stuff, and or was that guy just a boxer? I'm getting mixed up now. I'm showing it because I'm a pacifist, folks. I don't watch that stuff. In ancient Rome, I would not have watched Christians being eaten by lions either. You should all be ashamed. But that's a joke, everyone. All right. So it's I don't know how much of it is like, oh yeah, these people were conservative Republicans all along, and now they feel like they're able to let it out, or with some of them, is it just they're going with the crowd and they realize like, oh no, Biden's out, Trump is in, so now I'm gonna be, hey, MAGA. I've always been MAGA. I don't know with some of this stuff. as to some of these people and how they're moving. But for sure, yeah, it's amazing to see how fast it switched.
It's a total tangent, but we got a little bit of time. I wrote an article at heymannature.substack.com a few weeks ago about how often it is that people's normal day-to-day IQ is so much higher than their political IQ.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a great reason for that. You get immediate feedback in your real day-to-day world when you do something smart
Right.
versus stupid. Whereas in politics, it's all diffuse and distorted, and you can exist on a bundle of lies and not understand why your votes are bringing you misery, because you can be lied to in that sense. So you're kind of dumb.
Mm-hmm.
And I think tech genius entrepreneurs are real similar. They probably grew up in a stew of moderate to severe leftism in school. And I think that until it looked like the Biden / Harris regime was going to really turn on tech, and they could see that, and it was like literally a left thing versus a right thing. Till that happened, I just suspect they were just reflexively center left in their politics. Nothing extreme, nothing goofy, but I'm a good person, therefore I'm a Democrat, that sort of thing.
Yeah, who the heck was I talking to? I can't remember. I was talking to someone recently about this. And with a lot of this stuff, I don't think it's that people became conservative. I think it's that everything shifted to the left, such that like J.K. Rowling, who was a left-wing feminist 20 years ago, is now, a radical TERF who's allied with, the right-wing evangelicals because she doesn't think people born with penises should be allowed in women's sports, and that's kind of weird that that's where we are, but that is where we are right now.
That is where we are. All right. I'm tempted to wind things up. Do you have anything more brickish to give?
I do.
Folks?
Yes. So real fast here, folks, let me just explain that this idea that, we don't like right now, there's unfair trade deals and whatever, and we've inherited this crazy system, and the other countries are penalizing our stuff, whereas it's open for business in the United States and they can sell to us. And so if we just impose retaliatory tariffs, that will level the playing field and reduce our trade deficit. Largely speaking, that doesn't work. All right. So real quickly, what does it mean if we're having a trade deficit? It means that, think of it this way, that foreigners want to, when they have a certain amount of dollars that they're spending on our stuff, but that it can include U.S. assets, including things like treasury bonds. Okay. And so if foreigners want to buy more of our assets than Americans want to buy of theirs, then the difference is made up in the trade deficit. Okay. And so if right now, for whatever reason, foreigners want to, for the amount of stuff that Americans want to spend on foreign goods, foreigners don't want to spend that much on U.S. goods, and they make the balance up by buying our, debt or stock or real estate or whatever. By then just making it harder for Americans to buy foreign stuff, that reduces the flow of dollars flowing, from Americans' hands to foreigners, right? Because now Americans aren't buying as much stuff from foreigners, right? So when Americans buy stuff from Japan, they use dollars to get yen to then buy the Japanese stuff, right? So if Trump imposes a huge tariff on Japanese exports or, imports into the U.S., now Americans aren't spending as many dollars on yen. And so that makes the dollar strengthen against the yen. So now the Japanese have fewer dollars with which to buy our stuff. And so it's, this idea that, that if you just make it harder for Americans to import stuff, that won't affect our exports. And so therefore that will be, that will help our trade balance. That's largely wrong. All right. It's not dollar for dollar. You can come up with stuff, but I'm just saying it's largely self-defeating, that if you make it harder for us to import goods from abroad, it will make it that much harder for our exporters to continue selling stuff to foreigners. And so all you're really doing is isolating us from international trade. It's not that you're, quote, improving the trade balance.
Well, that's a great point. I'm glad you made it. And very similarly, we often hear a lot of America First types grumbling about how China just bought a farm, or Sony just bought a big building. So what do you think would happen to the American economy and to consumers and producers in America if Trump went really crazy and got a law passed that made it completely illegal for any foreign entity to purchase an asset or property or a treasury bill here in America and could enforce it somehow, like follow all the threads of shell corporations or whatever and actually enforce it, what would happen?
Well, certainly if foreigners were barred from buying treasury debt, if the U.S. government continued to, if they tried to still run a deficit that was as big, that would make interest rates skyrocket, right? Because now it would be that, instead of having the whole world of potential savers to lend to the U.S. government, if now we're saying, no, you have to live inside the United States, that's just shrinking the pool of available savings to finance the deficit. So it would have to, make the yield increase in order to induce that much more saving. So that's one element. In terms of if a corporation's trying to issue new stock to raise capital, if you're saying it's illegal for foreigners to contribute to that, then it's just going to make it that much harder for corporations to do so. If real estate prices would fall if you don't allow foreigners to bid on it. So there's all that. So they would have, that would be good for people, young Americans who want to buy a new house, but it would be bad for everyone who owns real estate currently. Yeah. So there's that sort of effects. Related to that, though, that's another thing I want to say is, it's not just if someone's like, okay, Murphy, so you're just all pessimism, you're just shooting down everything, but give us something to do. Like the current situation's intolerable. If Trump just said, yeah, I'm going to have Elon and Vivek go nuts and we're going to cut $1 trillion of federal spending next year and not raise taxes, and so that the deficit's $1 trillion lower than otherwise would have been, that right there would do a lot to, quote, improve the trade balance, right? Because again, it just, the intuitive way to think about it is, if foreigners are lending us money, it's like effectively they're lending us the dollars, right? So they don't have those dollars to then buy our exports. Or another way of putting it is, if they're gaining $1 trillion in our debt, what are they sending us in exchange for that, right? Because that means down the road we owe them payments. So what are they giving us right now? Oh, they're giving us like TVs and cars. So if the thing you're objecting to is, hey, how come they're sending us more TVs and cars than we're sending them wheat and jet aircraft? It's partly because our government is borrowing trillions of dollars, partly financed by foreign lenders. And so if we just stop doing that, in the mechanics of it, in case you're wondering, well, how does that work step by step? If the government just cut spending and reduce the deficit to zero, that would make yields on treasuries fall. And then that would make treasury debt less attractive to foreigners, so they wouldn't try to buy as much. So that would make the dollar weaken, actually. That might be counterintuitive for people. And then that would make it easier for U.S. exporters to sell abroad, right? So that's kind of the step-by-step. But the big picture is, yes, if foreigners aren't lending us as much money, then they don't need to send us as many goods and services, to kind of make up for that, to like explain how is it that they're gaining our assets? Well, because they're sending us goodies. So if we stop selling them so many of our assets, namely government debt, then the trade flows reflect that. So that's what I would say, that, instead of like raising taxes and whatever, how about the U.S. government just stops borrowing so much? And that actually would do a lot to, quote, improving the trade balance.
Heck yeah. All right. Well, that was great, wonderful, smart, funny stuff. I'm glad that we got a incoming President Trump to do weird and wacky things that we can talk about, because you stopped fighting with Jeremy Kauffman on Twitter, X. So I was getting worried.
Yeah, I just had to make sure I didn't stand him up. No, he's coming on my show, Bob Murphy
Show. That's
awesome.
Awesome. What are you going to talk about?
Probably something that's going to get me fired, but in any event.
Yes, exactly. He'll at least toss out half a dozen third rails. You don't want to step on any of those. All right. Well, I look forward to that.
Try to limit it to midgets. That's really what we're going to.
That's the safest
deal with the midget question
of all the third rails. The MQ. All right.
The little people controversy, as they like to refer to it in polite society.
They love hearing that talk. Well, I look forward to checking that out. If you want to check that out, dear listeners and viewers, go to bobmurphyshow.com. He has, depending on where you're listening to this, go there, get all his other episodes. They are always interesting, always very high level, very smart, very thorough. And if you're already there, please check out YouTube, my show at Heyman Nature, Haman, and also my Substack, haymannature.substack.com. Thanks, Bob. Always a pleasure. And we'll talk to you all later.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, everybody.
You've just experienced another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. For more information and to subscribe to this podcast, visit bobmurphyshow.com.